All right. Hey, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Happy Friday night to all of you. Thanks for being with me tonight. As always, you could support the work I'm doing at friendlyatheist.com. And if you Patreon's your thing, you can go to patreon.com/Hemant. I also have Den here with me tonight. He's helping moderate all your comments. So if you have questions or thoughts about the stories as I'm going through them, please leave them in the YouTube comments section. We'll make sure I see them in between stories. And because there's so much to talk about, we'll just go ahead and get right into it. Let me talk about this story that involves the measles outbreak that is currently happening in Texas. Now, you may have seen those headlines because there's a Mennonite community in a part of Texas, lots of unvaccinated people, and wouldn't you know it, measles is now spreading very quickly through that region. I think the number I've heard is 160 people have been infected. At least 2 people, I think 2 children, have died because their parents are dumb enough not to vaccinate their kids. And the thing you need to know about vaccines, and I'm sure all of you watching this know this, measles is a very contagious disease, but the MMR vaccine that most children get when they enter public schools, that can actually prevent kids from suffering the consequences of it. And just like with the COVID vaccine, if 95% of the community, of the population is vaccinated, those viruses have a much harder time of spreading among the population. So not only is it important for you to be vaccinated, it's important for everyone around you to be vaccinated. So you know that, I know that. A bunch of people in Texas do not know that, apparently. And unfortunately, this is not unique to Texas or anything like that. A lot of right-wing, conservative, gullible people have decided that vaccines are a culture war issue, and they are fighting for their right to not get vaccinated, which is just the dumbest fight possible. And it doesn't just hurt them, it hurts all of us. Because if they're not vaccinated, that virus can keep spreading, and ultimately it could hurt us. We knew this during the COVID era. That's why we all got vaccinated. But a whole bunch of people really hate science. Okay, you know that. Let me get to the actual story here. In Texas, one thing I did not know until this week is that public schools and private schools in Texas have to report their vaccination rates. And I'm glad they do. I'm surprised in Texas they allow private schools that they have to report it. I would have thought they would have found a way out of it. But that means it's possible to know which schools, which areas are not vaccinated. And recently, a local news outlet published an article saying that there were 180 schools in North Texas, not the entire state, but just North Texas, 180 that had vaccination rates in kindergarten that were below 95%. So a lot of kids are entering these schools and they are not vaccinated. And let me show you what this article found here. I'll scroll in here. This is what it says. It says 62 North Texas schools had a 100% vaccination rate among kindergartners last year, but over 180 schools had less than 95%. And these are the lowest vaccination rate schools in that part of North Texas. And you could see here, there are 6 schools where the vaccination rate is under 50%. And again, 50% is not the bar. The bar is 95%. So Everyone on this list is failing. But these schools, oh my goodness, like virtually no one. 1 out of every 3 kids, 1 out of every 6 kids is vaccinated, and everyone else is not. And that is disturbing, and that is dangerous for everyone at the school. But look at the one that's at the very top of the list there. That is Mercy Culture Preparatory Academy. By the way, if you look at this list of the lowest vaccination rated schools, you could see Mercy Culture, that's a private Christian school. Then you got a private Christian school. Excellence Academy, I believe, is a public charter school. The next 2 are Christian schools. St. Anthony is a Catholic school, another Christian school. So who's not vaccinating their kids? It's a lot of private religious schools. Okay. Number 1 on this list, Mercy Culture Preparatory Academy. No one there in the kindergarten class seems to be vaccinated, right? Very disturbing. So if you look at that school's website, you would never know this is the worst vaccinated school. And actually, I know that chart I just showed you was for North Texas, but Mercy Culture is actually the lowest vaccinated school in all of Texas, if you look at the data. And again, what do they say? They're all about shaping a biblical worldview, right? We develop the whole student. This is assuming those students live through childhood. Academic excellence. They're fully accredited. Okay. Like it seems like a pretty normal private Christian school. This is what they do, and they'll take your money if you want to apply there. Okay. That in itself is not weird. One of the things they say on the website, if you go to their About page, is check this out. We're a fully accredited school, K through 12. Our primary goal at Mercy Culture Preparatory has always been to educate the whole child. We believe God is at the center of all subjects. Our teachers are highly qualified, degreed, and dedicated to train the next generation of young people that have a desire to make an impact in their communities through God's truth and love. Yeah, I don't care what else. As a school, we seek a partnership with parents to help raise students who will impact their culture. And let's stop there, because it seems like the only way the students at this school are impacting their culture is by setting themselves up to be vectors of a literal disease, because none of these people have to get vaccinated. The school doesn't require it. And actually, if you go to the part of the school that says parent forms, like you have to fill out at the beginning of the year, some of it's normal, medical and emergency contact form. Fine, yeah. Look at the bottom thing on this list. Vaccinations affidavit application. Basically, if you don't want your kids to be vaccinated, here's the form you have to fill out, because the school does have to submit this to the state, and then you're good to go. But they're basically encouraging parents, pressuring them, like in a way that you don't have to get your kids vaccinated here. Just fill out some paperwork and you're good, and we'll take your kids anyway. Who cares if we're putting all the other kids at risk? But okay, so this is the school. I'll show you one more thing about their website because it made me laugh. There's a page that talks about their values, and check out the values here. Number 1 on the list, health. We remain healthy by prioritizing daily personal encounters with God, pursuing purity, putting family first, and protecting our Sabbath so we can lead others in health. This is one of the least actually healthy schools in the state of Texas, because they're literally putting themselves at risk of making everybody sick. And they're like, you know what our top priority is at this school? Health. So this is this school. And why do I bring all this up? I know you're expecting me to say they've had a measles outbreak. I am happy to tell you, for the sake of the kids, that has not happened. There is no measles outbreak at this school yet. But there's something else I want to show you. Because this week, and you may have seen this online, there is a church, Mercy Culture, that runs this school. And the pastor of that church, his name is Landon Schott, he decided to brag about that news report I showed you saying that Mercy Culture Prep is the worst vaccinated school in the state of Texas. I'm going to show you this video he made, or at least a good section of it. And and just, I guess, look at his joy for how he's putting kids in danger. Here you go.
Hey guys, quick video. I just walked into an MC Prep board meeting and there was these balloons and a surprise gift. I'm like, what's this going out? And I just found out, I'm a little behind on the news. I'm a little slow, getting old. But I just found out we are the #1 school in Texas for least vaccinations. And I guess the news got a hold of it and they were trying to spin it like it was some awful thing. But I just want to congratulate all of the family members of MC Prep that embrace freedom of health, and they're not allowing government or science projects to affect how you live and lead your life. I know the entire world was shut down with insanity and people were fired from their job for forced vaccinations, and freedom is something that we take seriously. Religious freedom, freedom of our health. And so shout out to MC Prep for being the least vaccinated school in Texas. We'll take it, or as Mercy Culture say, we celebrate it, we'll put it on the board.
I don't even know where to start with that. This idea that vaccines are like a science project, like they're an experiment. We're testing on kids. No, like we test it and we know they work, and there is plenty of evidence showing that they work. And the people who know the least about how vaccines get created and tested are also the same ones who are the loudest to say, I don't need to get my kids vaccinated. I don't need to get all the shots when they're young. I can spread them out over time. I can support RFK Jr., who says vaccines cause all kinds of things that they don't cause. Like, oh my God, it's the joy this man has in putting his own students in jeopardy. Like, I cannot even imagine how broken your brain has to be to celebrate that, hey, you know who's going to die? Maybe a bunch of kids at our school, because we're all very irresponsible adults who send our kids here or run this place. I don't know. He was holding up a shirt. Did you see the shirt? I don't know if you saw the shirt. This is the shirt he was holding up. They literally made shirts saying MC Prep, #1 school in Texas, and the fine print for least amount, I think, for least amount of vaccinations. They made celebratory shirts saying we're the #1 school in Texas for being dumb. Oh my God, what the hell? I want to be mad, but I don't, these people. Like, at this point, you might as well stop handing out shirts and just start handing out body bags. I don't know why COVID did not teach these people the lesson that vaccines are good. Like, even Mitch McConnell supports vaccines because he had polio, and the vaccines like stopped polio for a long time. And even that guy's like, you know what we should do? I love everything Trump does, but vaccines are good. And meanwhile, COVID happened and the vaccines cut the death rates completely. And these people are like, COVID was bad because they tried to rescue us. How dare they? It was a liberal conspiracy, this deadly airborne disease. Trying to shut down public gatherings in order to prevent the spread of the disease was apparently a liberal conspiracy to them. And now they don't want to get kids vaccinated for measles because of it. Again, I would care so much less about this if it was just them, but they don't live in a bubble as much as they want to. They live in the same society we live in, which means the air they breathe is the air you're going to breathe. So their dumb choices affect everybody. Like, I don't know. I would love to know. Does this guy actually know how vaccinations work and he rejects it? Does he understand how herd immunity works and he just doesn't get math? Or does he just buy into the right-wing lie that rejecting vaccines is a point of pride because freedom? Because that's pretty much what he sounded like in there. But he is celebrating the fact that his school puts more kids at risk of dying from a preventable disease because the parents who send their kids there are equally clueless, and they're all surrounded by other irresponsible adults. They're so pro-life, they're willing to sacrifice their own children and yours to own the libs. And it's not just this dude and his church, because even politicians are now getting involved. There is a state representative in Texas. His name is Nate Schatzline. He's a Republican who represents this district, and I guess he actually sends his kids to this school. Well, this is what he posted this week on X/Twitter. Breaking news. Breaking. I've gotten word that my children's school has been ranked the #1 most unvaccinated school in Texas, and I'm upset that we haven't celebrated sooner. Way to go, MC Prep. You've earned a Medical Freedom Award from my office. Oh my God. This dude, this guy is so he made a whole ass video celebrating how his kids are more likely to die of measles. Because again, pro-life and Christian. There you go. I swear, it's not just one person. It's all of these people. They're all this horrible. Just a parade of religious morons who are so selfish that they are unwilling to protect their own communities because it might mean acknowledging that scientists got this one right. This guy's video, by the way, included criticism of a transgender scientist who wasn't even involved directly with the vaccines during COVID, but was part of Health and Human Services during the Biden administration. Why was there a random attack on a transgender scientist? Because they're conservative Christians and this is what they do. They got to throw in some bigotry. Otherwise, how are you going to know they're conservative Christians? When a local newspaper, the Dallas Morning News, asked this representative about this stuff, they were like, hey, we want to talk to you about your anti-vax position. This is what he said to the Dallas Morning News. Schatzline told the news on Thursday that he is a pastor. Oh, he's a pastor at this church as well. He shared his X post in response to a request for further comment. On Thursday morning, he posted, "Don't let spiritually unhealthy people tell you how to be healthy." Just to decipher that, don't let people who are vaccinated but don't share his religious views tell you how to live your life, because what do they know? They only care about living. Later in the day, shot the pastor, rather. This is this is the pastor now. Shot reposted a post from another account praising Mercy Culture Preparatory's low vaccination rate. Why is it important? Because traditional thought is averse to this kind of freedom, the other account stated. RFK Jr. is showing us the truth about many vaccines. He's not, though. He's only in this position because RFK Jr. is a vaccine denier. And if you saw the news this week, you may have seen that as a result of the measles outbreak, RFK Jr. is like, you guys, maybe you should get vaccinated. Like, even RFK Jr. is like, oh, this could be bad. You know how to solve it. It's the thing I was telling you not to do. Maybe you should try that. Just an army of crazy people. So anyway, these people are all celebrating being unvaccinated because right now, the virus has not affected the kids in their school as far as we know. But if and when that happens, everyone in that building is at risk. And the virus will spread faster because that's how measles works. That's why it's so contagious. And all the people who live in this community in North Texas, everyone these parents and children interact with will be in danger too. And these Christians do not care because they falsely believe their religion will protect them from disease because they're too arrogant to listen to experts who have studied viruses their entire lives. As one person said in a comment to the pastor on Instagram, we get why you're excited. Funerals for children are very lucrative for pastors. And I guess there's a math silver lining too, because when that outbreak inevitably happens, the math suggests the vaccination rate at Mercy Culture will go right up to 100% because everyone else will be gone. As I was looking up stuff for this story, I came across one other story, by the way. I haven't had time to read it, but I just want to share this with you. Masters of Manipulation. This is from the Fort Worth Weekly. Survivors of sex trafficking allege they were exploited by Mercy Culture church leaders for financial gain. Survivors of sex trafficking. This is from 2022. It's from a couple of years ago. It doesn't make the pastor look good. And by the way, I don't believe he commented for that story either. So that's what we're talking about here. I think I'm going to stop there because the only other stuff I have to say about it is screaming loudly into the void. What questions do you all have right now while I try to wipe the stain of this dude off of me? One child died in Texas and one adult died in New Mexico. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I appreciate it. And also disturbing. And I think both of them were unvaccinated, to be clear, even the adult. But that's just the beginning. The vaccination rate in Texas is actually higher than in Oklahoma. Oklahoma has only 88% in the whole state. Disturbing. I guess the one reason why it might be less of a concern is because so much of Oklahoma and large parts of Texas are so rural that you're not living like in a huge city everywhere where you're just surrounded by a gazillion people. If you're living where there's only a handful of people, the virus can't travel as easily, but still, this is preventable diseases. We have a miracle from science, which is vaccinations. And some people are like, nah, I'm good. And the weird thing is you could easily make an argument that God gave us the tools to develop these vaccines. He gave us brains to create them and figure out how they work. You could rationalize it that way. And these people are like, no, who cares if we have vaccines? We're just going to pray and get better. Thank you for that donation, Elizabeth. These people are idiots. For the anti-vax who claim it causes autism, I'd rather have my tiny human who is ASD, autism spectrum, than not have him at all. Yeah, besides the fact that vaccinations do not cause autism, and no scientific study has ever suggested there is an actual link, that claim that one causes the other, which is false, it also suggests there's something wrong with kids who have autism, and that's not true either, which, again, that's just a separate problem with that whole linkage. So he's proud of being the next epicenter for the next vaccine preventable pandemic. Yeah, and when people start, if and when this outbreak happens and it hits the school, and from the school it goes everywhere, this guy's going to be proud as the death toll goes up. They're just going to pray for it to get better. And then when people die, they'll just say, well, God has a reason for it. It's what they did during COVID. Literal child murder. Thank you for that donation. It will be. That's my fear. I don't know why I care about the kids at this dude's school more than he does. I want them to live and go on to live productive lives and happy lives, however they want. And this pastor who's running the church that oversees the school is like, you know what we do at this school? We let kids die. If it happens, it happens. Seems like people shouldn't be allowed to be pro-life and anti-vax at the same time. I mean, you could play this game for anything. They're pro-life and pro-gun. They're pro-life. They don't care about mass shootings. They're pro-life and they support the death penalty. I mean, the hypocrisy is pretty much the one thing all of these people have in common. Will the lack of vaccinations increase or decrease enrollment? You know, one thing that has happened, and I've seen this at some churches anecdotally, is that when the school says, we don't need vaccinations for your kids to come into the school, or a church says, you don't need to be vaccinated, and if you need a pastor signature so you can get out of getting a vaccine for work, we'll sign it for you. By playing into that propaganda, that false propaganda, a lot of these churches actually end up bringing more people on board who are MAGA cultists who reject science. And I suspect the same is true for the school, because this school's advertising itself, inadvertently or not, as a place where anti-vaxxers can go. And so you're going to have a crowd of people because, these people hate herd immunity, but they will follow the herd every time when it comes to conspiracy theories. They're all going to start making recommendations. Hey, friends, if you take your kids to this private Christian school, you don't need to care about your kids. And then they all start following suit. Dealing with a buttload of water damage in the shop. This is making it a bit better. I don't know what you're referring to, but I hope work gets a little better. And I'm sorry you're dealing with water damage. But thank you for that. And thank you for that donation. Remember to like the stream and sub to the channel. Thanks, Elizabeth. I appreciate you doing what I should be doing when I'm talking here. Thank you so much. All right. For your free vaccine against religion, while I grab some water really quickly. Okay. There was one other story that just made me this mad. Other stuff makes me mad, but not this mad. Because the other thing I wanted to talk about is this story that involves all the famous atheists that you all know. Okay. The short version of the story is that a whole bunch of those new atheists that were famous 10, 20 years ago, they are all contributing to a new book on the war on science. And that sounds great because think about it. Right now, science very much is under attack. I just did a story about how a school was ignoring science and refusing to get vaccinated. Well, if you were going to write a book about the war on science in 2025, what do you think it should cover? You know, just to name a few things from the past few weeks, you could talk about how the Trump administration has fired thousands, if not tens of thousands of employees at our finest science agencies. That's bad. How Republicans are decimating funding for research in areas that the private sector will never fund because it's not obviously profitable for them. They're defunding colleges where a lot of the science research happens. You could talk about how Trump is destroying the NIH, how Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, left the World Health Organization, told US scientists not to work with scientists from the World Health Organization. They've promoted people like RFK Jr. to positions of prominence despite a measles outbreak being underway. By the way, bird flu is still a thing right now, and we should be worried about that, but the government doesn't seem to care right now. So this could go on for a while because the current Republican Party is arguably the biggest threat to scientific progress we have ever seen. And it's led by people, the Republican Party is led by people who reject science, and they hate the actual scientists who contribute to our communal knowledge of what is happening in the world. So if you were writing a book about the war on science, there's so much material you could draw from, and that's just from like the past 2 weeks. I want to tell you one other thing, and then I'll tie this all together. If you were going to publish a book about anything, wouldn't you want to work with a publisher that, you know, has a good reputation? I'm going to tell you about this publisher. Do you all remember the name Breonna Taylor? She was the Black woman who lived in an apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. And a few years ago, there was a police raid on her home. I don't believe they had a warrant. The police barged in. They shot and killed Breonna Taylor because they thought, I don't know, her boyfriend had drugs or something. He didn't. Tragic story. And the police, what the hell were they doing? You don't need me to rehash on any of this. But in 2021, after people had known Breonna Taylor's name, one of the cops who was responsible for that raid on her house said he was going to publish his own version of the events in a book called The Fight for Truth, the inside story behind the Breonna Taylor tragedy. And when the publisher announced that book, there was so much backlash to the idea of a killer cop profiting off the murder of a Black woman that the parent company behind that publisher, Simon & Schuster, they were like, oh shit, what are you people doing down there? We don't work with you directly. We just help you out. But like, what are you doing? And when they found out about this book, they said, we are not going to help distribute this book, even though we have nothing to do with it. And in fact, this is what they said at the time. If I could find this. This is from the New York Times in 2021. Like much of the American public, earlier today, Simon & Schuster learned of plans by distribution client, which is a weird way to say, like, we don't work with these people directly, distribution client Post Hill Press to publish a book by Jonathan Mattingly, the publisher said in a statement. We have subsequently decided to not be involved in the distribution of this book. And the person who works for Post Hill Press said in a statement, we're still publishing this book. His story is important, and it deserves to be heard by the public at large. We feel strongly that an open dialogue is essential to shining a light on the challenging issues our country is facing. Which is a very weird way to spin a story of a white cop murdering a Black woman. But this is what they did. This is Post Hill Press. The New York Times here even described it as a company. Look at this. They specialize in Christian and conservative political books. So that's the publisher. If you do a Google search for Post Hill Press, that's the story you're going to find, that debacle involving the cop who helped murder Breonna Taylor. Okay, and that same publisher, by the way, they have published books by Dan Bongino, the FBI second in command now and conspiracy theorist and radio host. They used to be led by a guy who worked with another group that worked with Newsmax, like the Fox News that goes even further than Fox News. Okay, why do I mention all of this? Because this publishing company is now publishing a book on the war on science. And this is what it's all about. Check this out. That's Lawrence Krauss. He's editing the book. And you could see the cover. 39 renowned scientists and scholars speak out about current threats to free speech, open inquiry, and the scientific process. That's the war on science. Lawrence Krauss, the famous scientist, and who's written books about atheism and cosmology and climate change, is working with a right-wing Christian publisher to publish a book on the war on science. And I was hesitant. I heard about this book months ago, but, I don't really know what's in the book. I haven't seen it. I don't even know if it's ready to send out advanced copies yet. So it's kind of hard I don't want to prejudge the book, right? Because it's not out. But then recently, Lawrence Krauss shared the table of contents. This is what he shared on X, Twitter. People have asked for the table of contents for the war on science, being released July 29th and available now for pre-order on Amazon. Here it is. And he published this table of contents. So let me blow this up for you here. This thing is just batshit crazy. And we're going to talk about this, but I want you to notice a couple things. Let's see. It's broken up into sections, not chapters, sections. What is section 1 of the war on science? Free speech, victimhood, and ideology. That is not, I don't see the word Republican in there. Who's writing for this? Richard Dawkins. Of course he is. Who else you got? I don't know how many of those names you know, but those are all names famous for falling for right-wing conspiracy theories and spreading right-wing propaganda, saying that liberals have hijacked science and feminism is evil and all that stuff. Look at section 2. We'll go into depth in some of this in a second. Section 2, ideological corruption of academic disciplines, as if biology has been taken over by the trans. The hell are they talking? Who's contributing to that? Oh, Jerry Coyne is in there. Got to have him talking about ideological corruption. Section 3, cancel culture. I'm surprised they don't have everybody contributing to this one. Section 4, the impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracies on scholarship in academia and beyond. It's a section about DEI. And who's contributing to that one? We got Peter Boghossian. He's written books about atheism. And then gender, race, ideology, science, and scholarship, which is a weird title because the whole book is about that, apparently. And finally, what can be done? I got an idea. You take some duct tape and you put it over your mouth and tie your hands together so you don't type. Who's contributing here? We got Steven Pinker. He's contributed a lot of books about this. Oh, and then the famous scientist, Jordan friggin' Peterson. What are these people doing? Honestly, if you're contributing anything to a book and you see the name Jordan Peterson on there, you have failed in your career if they're lumping you together with him. Listen, if you don't know Jordan Peterson, first of all, congratulations to you. Let's trade places. Jordan Peterson is my favorite story about him is that he tweeted out fetish porn because he seriously believed it came from a Chinese sperm extraction factory. And then he posted a video of it. And everyone's like, dude, do you know what you just tweeted? And he's Jordan Peterson. So it took a long time before that tweet came down. That's Jordan Peterson for you. Let me go back for a second, though. Let's talk about what the hell these people are doing. All of this is just right-wing grievances that only belong on like Joe Rogan's podcast and not anywhere smart people should be going. These are not the subjects actual scientists discuss when they are commiserating with each other about what keeps them up at night. Like, I think this week Trump just tried to get rid of the people who forecast the weather and shutting down their buildings to make it harder to know when hurricanes are coming. Those scientists are not talking about like, oh, you know what really ruined my career this week? It's when we interviewed a black woman to be hired in our department who has a degree in the thing we study. No, they're not talking about whatever these people are talking about. This list makes about as much sense as discussing hydroxychloroquine among the scientists who developed the COVID vaccines. Like, you guys are the dumb ones and you're ignoring the smart people. When I looked at the actual write-up about this book, this is on Simon & Schuster's website because they still own that imprint. Look at how they describe this. An unparalleled group of prominent scholars from wide-ranging disciplines detail ongoing efforts to impose ideological restrictions on science and scholarship throughout Western society. I'm not going to read all of this, but look at this stupid description. From assaults on merit-based hiring, because, you know, people of color cannot possibly have merit, to the policing of language and replacing well-established disciplinary scholarship by ideological mantras, current science and scholarship is under threat. Like, I swear, I don't know what mantras you think you have to say to get a science grant these days. I would like to know. As this group of prominent scholars ranging across many different disciplines, which is a very nice way to put a blanket over Jordan Peterson as well, the very future of free inquiry and scientific progress is at risk. Many who have spoken up against this threat have lost their positions, and a climate of fear has arisen that strikes at the heart of modern education and research. Banding together to finally speak out, this brave and unprecedented group of scholars issues a clarion call for change. Do you know who has not been silenced? It's every single person who's contributing to this book, because I can't stop hearing from them. They whine so damn much, they're like a toddler. Like, you can't not. How are they silenced? We hear them all the time. They have gazillions of followers on social media. They make so much money off of their YouTube videos and Patreon pages and stuff like that. And the reason, like, many who have spoken up against this threat have lost their positions. They have not lost their positions because they were like, hey, maybe we should rethink how we're doing this. I'll tell you why some of them lost their positions, and it's not that. But before that, there's one blurb for this book. It's from Sabine Hassenfelder, who's a physicist. Higher education isn't what it used to be. Cancel culture and DEI have caused many to keep their mouths shut. Name one. Name one person who hates DEI who has shut their mouths up about it. Doesn't exist. Not so the authors of this book. This collection of essays tells of threats to open inquiry, free speech, and the scientific progress itself. A much needed book. The hell are you talking about? Like, yeah, science and scholarship really are under threat. Scientific progress really is at risk. There is a climate of fear that is impacting research. And these idiots have no clue where it's coming from. They are not coming from student protesters at college who are sick and tired of what's happening in Palestine. It's not coming from the so-called language police, a thing that doesn't exist. It's not coming from left-wing bloggers, because there's like 4 of us left and none of us make any money. They're coming from the highest levels of government, which is something you would not know if you read this book according to the table of contents. Like, if you think DEI, trying to get people of color and more women involved in science and protecting the civil rights of marginalized communities are bigger threats to scientific progress than all the things Republicans are doing with their power, you have completely lost the thread. What the hell is wrong with you? Right? Okay, let's talk about a couple of these people. Let's start with Lawrence Krauss, okay? Lawrence Krauss has been waging a war against the, quote, DEI nightmare for a while now. He's literally called on Elon Musk to defund scientific institutions that do work in that capacity. I made a video about this maybe a few months ago, but he wrote an article for a Canadian newspaper, a right-wing Canadian newspaper, where he said over 10% of the United States National Science Foundation's grants were for DEI initiatives and not science. And how does he know 10% of those grants went for DEI and not science? He calculated it by asking ChatGPT, like copy pasting a list of the grants that were given out, putting it in ChatGPT and saying, can you tell me if these are scientific or DEI? And ChatGPT's like, 10% is DEI. It never occurred to Lawrence Krauss that, grants to underprivileged groups could also be scientific in nature, or that there might be scientific value to getting input from people with different backgrounds. He acts like minorities were getting money for reasons that have no basis in what they were studying, and I have not seen any proof of that whatsoever. And this has nothing to do with this book, but I feel like if we're talking about Lawrence Krauss, I'm going to show you the worst thing he's ever said in his life, because in 2011, you may remember this man named Jeffrey Epstein. Lawrence Krauss was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He took money from Jeffrey Epstein. And again, maybe that's not a problem if you had no clue what that dude had been up to. But after Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting minors for sex, after that, Lawrence Krauss still defended Epstein. And this is from an article from the Daily Beast. And I want to share this with you because of how disturbing it is. Let's read it together, shall we? Renowned scientists whose research Epstein has generously funded through the years also stand by him. Again, I just want to be clear. This is after he pleaded guilty to doing one bad thing involving a child, but before we all found out the extent and how bad it really was. But he definitely pleaded guilty already. Look at what Lawrence Krauss said. Lawrence Krauss has planned scientific conferences with Epstein on the island and remained close with him throughout his incarceration. If anything, the unfortunate period he suffered has caused him to really think about what he wants to do with his money and his time and support knowledge, says Krauss. Jeffrey, they're on a first name basis, Jeffrey has surrounded himself with beautiful women and young women, but they're not as young as the ones that were claimed. As a scientist, I always judge things on empirical evidence, and he always has women ages 19 to 23 around him, but I've never seen anything else. So as a scientist, my presumption is that whatever the problems were, I would believe him over other people. Though colleagues have criticized him over his relationship with Epstein, Krauss insists, I don't feel tarnished in any way by my relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Sorry, Jeffrey. I feel raised by it. I'm sure you did. It's so weirdly specific. I've only seen women around Jeffrey who are ages 19 to 23. I mean, no 24-year-olds allowed in this mix. He could easily have said 18. But no, he's no, they were all 19. I checked their IDs and I definitely didn't see 14 in the mix. What the hell? And that's besides the accusations of sexual misconduct he faced at wherever he was, Arizona State, and that he denies. But then before the school did an investigation, he's like, you can't investigate me. I quit. So that's Lawrence Krauss. He's editing this book. I've talked about Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins ad nauseum over the past couple of months. They can't stop demonizing trans people because they think trans people are deluded and they don't know their own bodies and they don't know how science works. Steven Pinker has spent years fixated on fighting social justice and wokeness. Peter Boghossian thinks he's a victim of free speech. He's waged wars on pronouns and academia. Some of the other people contributing to the book are not famous atheists, but they are famous in right-wing academic circles. Just to give you a quick rundown, some of those people, let me tell you about their personal controversies. You have someone who said we need more white people and fewer Asians in the United States. There was another person who wrote an entire article defending that racism. There was someone who argues that the bones of indigenous people belong to science labs and not tribes. There's people who support Israel's genocide against Palestinians. There are people who denounce Black Lives Matter while also backing the use of the N-word. There are people who deny the impact of climate change. There are people who helped perpetuate the opioid crisis because, like, they provided help to Purdue Pharmaceuticals. There are people who have been accused of gender-based harassment at their colleges. People who've been accused of sexual misconduct. It's just a whole gallery of people who routinely get dunked on by the entire internet for very good reason, and they all claim they're the true victims in everything. These are the same people who work with the right-wing fake University of Austin that's like, we're about free speech and nothing else. These are the same people who signed like the Harper's letter. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go Google it. But like, that thing was a joke. They routinely promote the free press or anything Barry Weiss does. They think Bill Maher is still the funniest dude on television. They get excited whenever a conservative New York Times op-ed columnist defends bigotry and, you know, denounces trans people. A lot of these people resigned from their university jobs after the backlash to what they did meant they were going to get fired. So they all quit in advance. And then that made them stars in the conservative ecosystem. They whine about free speech because they cannot handle criticism. And they refuse to adjust their views when confronted with better and more nuanced information. And you would think that's kind of what you're supposed to do as a scientist, but these people don't actually care. In short, the people who have thrown away any credibility they may have once had in the scientific world are now claiming to understand the real attacks on science, and not a single section in this stupid book explicitly covers the harm caused by Republicans. Like maybe at best when this book comes out, we'll see a little section like, sure, Trump is bad. But you know where the real problem is? It's like Black people who want rights. Like, these guys act like progressive activists and trans people asserting their humanity, and universities that celebrate inclusion, and academics who study things that they don't personally understand are the true enemies of science, as opposed to the politicians who dismantle scientific institutions around the world. Like, there is a book about the war on science that I wish would be written right now, but it's not this one. This one is a joke, and that's before the text of the book is even out. And I think there's one last thing about this. A couple years ago, there was a book that came out. It's called The War on Science, and it's written by a guy named Sean Otto. But I find it interesting because guess who wrote the foreword to that book? Lawrence Krauss. I didn't read this book. It looks fine to me. Like, I don't have any objections to this one, but I do find it kind of funny that Lawrence Krauss wrote a foreword to a book called The War on Science, and now a couple years later, he's like, you know what a good title for a book would be? It's the one I used to write. It's the one I wrote about years ago. I'm just going to hijack that name and make it about something totally different. Like, there's got to be something to that, right? You don't just accidentally write a book with the same title as a book you've already contributed to. That just seems weird. All right. I'm done. What else we got here? What questions y'all got? If I were to write about the war on science, I would talk about the rampant science denial around trans identity and healthcare, but I'm a bit biased since I'm a trans girl studying biomed. See, I'm sorry to tell you, apparently you're not qualified to learn science because I've contributed a chapter to a book called The War on Science. But like, thank you for what you're doing. And here's the thing. I know so many trans people who work in the scientific world, and they know this stuff. They are not deluded about themselves. They do amazing work, and it's infuriating to me. And I'm cis. It's gotta be infuriating for you because you have these idiots who are pretending to be experts about fields you are literally an expert in. And just because you may have written a popular book in the past, maybe you were an expert in a particular field in the past, doesn't mean you're an expert on everything all the time. But thank you for sharing that. Notably, most of these people are old and haven't done actual research in forever. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I don't even care about their age. And you know what? You don't necessarily have to be in the lab to write about the attacks on science. But also, if you don't know anything about where the attacks on science are coming from, you also shouldn't write a book about where it is. And so those are not my two objections to this, but those are two things that are worth pointing out. If there is a war on science, and there certainly is, the people who wrote this book are less revolutionary rebels and more American settlers fighting for the British. Redcoats, man, they love the red. As an active biologist, it's really telling that this book doesn't seem to mention decreasing funding availability. You know what bothers me? The people who are contributing to this book have access to so much money, not just scientific grants for whatever they pretend, but like there are right-wing rich people who will throw money at their favorite conspiracy theorists with giant platforms that they're never gonna suffer for lack of finances. Meanwhile, the people doing actual research and wanting to do good work have to struggle tooth and nail to get anything. It's the priorities are so misplaced. Everything I don't understand is woke. A petulant idiot's guide to being a contrarian. Now, see, that would be a better name for the title of a book. Question: do you know about the current Attorney General Pam Bondi's connection to Scientology through doing fundraisers hosted by them multiple times in Florida? I got to tell you, I don't know much about her connection to Scientology. If I've ever researched Pam Bondi, it's in the case of church-state separation stuff. But and I know Florida has a huge Scientology headquarters and whatnot there, but I am not familiar with what she has done with them, for them, etc. Thank you for that donation. Can't wait to talk about this with my coworker who guessed I was an atheist because I wanted a Drake equation tattoo. Love it. I'm very curious what your coworker is going to say about that, about the book. All right. I'm going to jump to a regular story of just people doing dumbass things. Give me a second. Okay. Let's talk about West Virginia. West Virginia Republicans don't just want to pass a bill to promote Christian nationalism. They want to change their entire state constitution. And they want to change the state constitution to reflect that the Holy Bible is like the greatest book in the universe. And obviously what I just told you is completely illegal, what they're trying to do, but now they want to justify it. This is the text of House Joint Resolution 31. Let me share this with you here. This is what they want to change the Constitution to say. Article 2, recognition of Holy Bible as foundational text. The state of West Virginia recognizes the Holy Bible, complete with the 66 books of the Old and New Testaments, and definitely not like the Mormon third part of the trilogy, and not the apocryphal stuff, as the divinely inspired, inerrant foundational document for our society and government. An accurate historical record of human and natural history. They want the Constitution to say Noah's Ark is literally true. And the utmost authority for human moral behavior. As such, the Holy Bible and its precepts shall be given a place of prominence and reverence in the public buildings, laws, policies, and schools of the state of West Virginia. Now, why are they doing this? I think the simple answer is all the times we talk about Christian nationalism and putting the 10 Commandments in public schools, and in Oklahoma trying to get the Bibles in schools. What happens is those things get shot down by the courts. Why do they get shot down by the courts? Because the courts always say, well, the Constitution says separation of church and state. It says the state cannot promote religion, it's neutral, etc. If they could get this passed, that the state of West Virginia says the Bible is sacrosanct or whatever, it would provide a rationale, like the foundation, so that they can pass other forms of Christian nationalism. And they could be like, well, we want to put the 10 Commandments up in school, and it's legal because our Constitution says the Bible rules. That's what this is about. It's creating a way to get out of judges get away from judges who keep saying, well, the Constitution says this. And they're like, well, what if we made the Constitution also say this? And then it would screw up all the judges, right? That's the idea behind this. But of course, there are a lot of problems with the way this text is worded. It says the state of West Virginia recognizes the Holy Bible. Which one? There are many translations, and not all Christians believe all of them are the same, right? You can't just say the Bible. You got to say which type of Bible. Is it the KJV? Is it the NIV? Which one do you want? This idea that it's divinely inspired. By who? Which God? Are you telling me? Like, is this an amendment that says Christianity is real and the government's going to work off of that as a basis? Because there goes religious freedom. Because you're saying it's divinely inspired, you're implying that Christianity is true. It says it's inerrant. I mean, that's just dumb. Everyone can name contradictions in the Bible, things that start on page 1, right? The order of how God created the universe is not inerrant. It doesn't make any sense. The accurate historical record, obviously, it's not accurate history. Nothing in the book of Genesis actually happened. It could not have happened. That's not how it happened. But if they did that, you can imagine how they could then say, well, we need to adjust science curriculum across the state and history classes and what they teach, because it's got to be in sync with what the Holy Bible says happened. And obviously, utmost authority for human moral behavior, that of course is justification for them to do like an abortion ban and get rid of marriage equality and all that stuff, because it's always a right-wing interpretation of morality. They're not talking about the Sermon on the Mount. They're talking about Leviticus. So anyway, that's what they're trying to do in West Virginia by getting this thing passed. I was curious. Last week, I made a video about the Pew Research Center's religious landscape study, huge study of religion across the country. I was curious what they said about West Virginia, and I looked it up. Check this out. In West Virginia, how important is the Bible among adults in West Virginia? Only 52% of West Virginians said the Bible is extremely or very important. 28% said like, no, not really, not at all. And 19% are in the middle. Like almost half of the people in the state, in the reddest state in the country, pretty much, almost half the people are like, yeah, I don't care about the Bible. And yet the Republicans in the legislature are like, you know what we should do? Let's override the entire Constitution with this. And who's going to stop us? Because we're all Republicans here. Like even in West Virginia, I think this is going to be a hard sell because there will be lawsuits over this. I think this entire thing, it's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist and one that only creates more problems. So look, this is a constitutional amendment. It's got a long way to go. Like it has to get 2/3 support from the House and the Senate in West Virginia. Then it's got to be voted on by the voters. This is assuming there are no lawsuits trying to stop this along the way. There absolutely would be. So long way to go, but I don't think they're doing this because they think it's going to pass. They're doing this to send a message. And the message is that when you live in West Virginia and it's a state run by Republicans, we obey the Bible in this state and the Constitution can go to hell. And if people are going to insist we keep the Constitution around, we're going to change the Constitution to say, I'm subservient to the Bible. And all of us are. And we all live under those rules and not whatever else the Constitution says. Just a dumb idea, but also pretty much what you expect out of West Virginia. So this bill was introduced just last week. It is currently in the hands of the House Judiciary Committee. They will decide if this bill can even move forward. And if it does, it may very well get the votes it needs. That doesn't mean the voters will go for it, even if lawmakers will. But just something to keep an eye on. What other questions we got here? I'd love to see all the different Christian denominations fighting about which version of their book is the one that is inerrant. Seriously, that's a better version of Squid Game. That is what we should do. Put them all in a circle, let them duke it out, and if your translation loses, you're out of the game. 52% seems like a lot, a bit terrifying. It is a lot. It's definitely a lot. But in West Virginia, I feel like I would have predicted that number to be a lot higher. All right. I'm going to jump to the next story here. Let me see if I can pull this up. Yeah, give me just a moment here. Gotta say, it feels very good to cross out tabs that have Lawrence Krauss's picture in it. Okay. Oh, yes. This is disturbing. Let's talk about Oklahoma, because Republican lawmakers in Oklahoma are seriously arguing that we need to make sure teachers can beat students who have disabilities in the classroom. Because if you don't allow them to do that, it would violate what the Bible says. That is seriously the argument they're making here. Here's what you need to know about this. Oklahoma is a state that actually permits corporal punishment in public schools. And that's a problem in and of itself. It says, teachers can spank, hit students if they feel it's necessary. But the law in Oklahoma does carve out one exemption to that. It says you cannot hit a kid with the most significant cognitive disabilities. So teachers can theoretically spank kids, but a handful of students are off limits because they may not even understand they're doing anything wrong. And the last thing you want to do is then punish them with physical abuse for that. Now, for a couple of years now, Republicans, because they're the ones that control the Oklahoma legislature, they have been trying to pass a bill that they think can get signed into law even amongst Republicans. So how do you do that? If you wrote a bill that said, let's get rid of corporal punishment entirely, teachers should not be able to hit kids, you would actually not be able to get it anywhere in a Republican legislature in Oklahoma. So they can't do that. They can't say, let's get rid of it. It's a horrible idea. It is abuse. Let's say no. Can't do that. So what they've been trying to do for a couple of years is to say, well, instead of just exempting kids with significant cognitive disabilities, can we just cross out those two words and say teachers shouldn't be allowed to hit any kids with disabilities of any kind? That seems doable, right? So that's what they've been trying to do for a couple of years. In 2023, Republicans said, let's broaden that exemption to cover all kids with disabilities. One Republican actually signed on as a co-sponsor of that bill specifically because he thought this is totally going to pass. And he said to a reporter, there's going to be nobody who's for corporal punishment on students with disabilities. He thought it was a slam dunk. And then I guess he realized, oh, he's a Republican in Oklahoma, because they will always find a way to defend abuse in the name of Jesus. So a couple of years ago, when they brought up this bill for discussion, one of these state representatives, he argued that the Bible permits hitting kids as a form of discipline. Therefore, you got to let teachers have access to that. That lawmaker cited Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24, the infamous verse that says, spare the rod, spoil the child. And when somebody challenged him and said, well, the American Academy of Pediatrics says any kind of physical discipline against children is bad, and there's plenty of evidence showing the harm it causes in the long term, what did that Republican lawmaker say? He said, it doesn't matter because, quote, God's counsel is higher than the American Academy of Pediatrics. Another Republican lawmaker at the time also said teachers need the threat of violence to keep their classrooms in order. And I'm saying this as a guy who taught in a public school for more than 7 years. If your classroom is so chaotic that you think physical discipline is your only solution, you suck at your job. I'm sure plenty of teachers are tempted because things are chaotic, but you don't do it. Every movie about a heroic teacher never shows them physically abusing the kids, because everyone knows you don't do that if you actually want them to change for the better. And if you believe threatening children, especially kids with disabilities, with abuse is the only way to maintain order, you're just a bad adult, you're a bad parent, And if you think giving parents and teachers the right to beat up kids with disabilities is the best way to correct their behavior, you're also a shitty politician. Like, I don't know how else to say this, right? So anyway, that bill came up 2 years ago. And here's what's happened for the past couple of years. It'll make it through one chamber of the state legislature, and then it dies in the other. So that 2023 bill passed in the state house, died in the state senate. And I think last year they tried bringing up the bill again. It passed in the Senate. It did not get passed in the House, right? And they'll modify it in small ways every time, but it hasn't passed yet. This bill to just broaden the exemption so teachers cannot hit kids with disabilities has not worked. And this time around, when the bill was discussed, there should have been they brought it up again this recently. And this time, the bill specifically prohibits teachers from hitting, slapping, paddling, or using any other means of inflicting physical pain on students who have an IEP, an individualized education program, basically saying if any kid has a disability, you cannot hit them. That should have been a unanimous vote. But I want to play a clip for you here, because when this bill was discussed, a Republican state senator named Shane Jett, he decided he was going to defend the abuse of children with disabilities. And I want to show you what he said. Let me play this for you. Here we go.
But my question remains, how does the author of this bill rectify or bring congruent with Proverbs 23:13 that says, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with a rod, they will not die. Punish them with a rod and save them from death. And the author cited that they are different, but in Scripture, it's uniformly applied to everyone. Is there a different application of salvation? If you have a hearing aid, there's a difference for you. If you have eyeglasses, it's different from you. Don't talk about IEPs, because that's not what this bill covers. It's a subset. It's all disabilities. Here's another one. Proverbs 29:17. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace, and they'll bring you delight, and delights you desire. In our classrooms, how are we going to maintain discipline so that our teachers can teach academics if we have this disparate way of disciplining children? You can't discipline this one because of this reason or that.
I still go back to if you think you need to hit kids in order to keep them in line, you're just a bad human being. It is funny to me that in Oklahoma, Republicans will only defend, we got to let teachers have all the options and we got to leave it in their hands and we got to give them options when it comes to hitting kids with disabilities. But when it comes to teaching history or science or English, Republicans are like, we cannot allow teachers to have the final say in this. Let's just tell them what to teach. Here's the Bible they need to use. Here's the curriculum they need to follow. We can't let teachers just run amok. That would be insane. Anyway, we need to give them the option of hitting kids with disabilities. This guy also, in a different clip, I don't have this clip for you, but he also brought up that Dr. Benjamin Spock, not the Star Trek dude, but the famous pediatrician who wrote books about parenting, he said this no corporal punishment initiative is not in the interests of children or civilized society. This idea that you should not hit kids was popularized back when I was a child by Dr. Benjamin Spock, who was not a parent, but he wrote a book about the evils of discipline and corporal punishment, and then he ran later for president of the United States as a socialist. This guy has such a fetish for hitting kids that he just keeps recycling this argument because it's the same one he used last year. But for what it's worth, Benjamin Spock was pretty much what we would call today a pretty progressive guy in a lot of ways. And so naturally, he was labeled a communist. This mentality that the Bible says we have to be allowed to hit our kids to maintain discipline, this is not new. A lot of you may know that fundamentalist Christian culture is rife with child abuse. Michael and Debbie Pearl are infamous for writing a guide to faith-based abuse called To Train Up a Child. It's a book that tells adults how to properly hit their kids. And it's as awful as it sounds. It even recommended that Christian parents physically discipline kids as young as 6 months with, quote, the same principles the Amish use to train their stubborn mules. And I would also tell you that in Oklahoma, even though teachers have the option of hitting kids, it's not just theoretical. It's not like the law exists, but no one uses it. They actually do use it. In fact, this is if I can pull up this article here, the last time we have data on this, it is from a few years ago, but this is what it says. Check if I can pull this up. There we go. Look at what the numbers say. This is from a couple years ago, but Oklahoma educators report using physical discipline nearly 4,000 times during the 2017-18 school year, according to data from the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education. The federal government reported that corporal punishment was administered at more than 1,800 Oklahoma schools. So 1,800 schools, 4,000 victims. Teachers do hit kids because the law says it's okay. And the only kids who are exempt from that apparently are ones with severe physical disabilities. And these lawmakers are like, you know what we ought to fix? We should make it so that a few more kids are not allowed to be hit, but the rest of them still are. Unbelievable. These lawmakers want to protect kids from learning about like systemic racism, but they won't protect them from the abuse of their own teachers, all because their religion taught them abuse is more effective than compassion. If there's any good news here, it's after everything I just told you, after that clip, after the reference to Christianity and everything, even Republicans were not swayed by what Shane Jett said. So remember, what were we even talking about? There was a bill on the table that would say, instead of just saying severely cognitively disabled kids are the ones who are exempt, let's just say anyone who has any disability, anyone who has an IEP. That bill, despite what Shane Jett said, that bill passed 31-16 in the state Senate. And that means Democrats and Republicans voted to get that done. And now it moves on to the House, and we'll see what they say. All the no votes, all the ones who are like, nope, let's make sure as many kids can be hit as possible, all those votes came from Republicans. So if and when this bill becomes a law, corporal punishment will still be legal in Oklahoma, which is awful, but I guess a few more kids will be immune from Republican cruelty. So, yay. All right, I'll take questions now. Weird how they're so focused on the hit your kids part of the Bible, but not on the don't be a dick part. Don't be a dick part is actually my favorite quotation from Jesus. But yeah, I get your point. They never care about the Sermon on the Mount. They don't care about what Jesus said about loving your neighbors. It's always about the part where, I don't know, Noah beat up his children on the boat or whatever it is he did. Thanks, Elizabeth. Good reply. Jesus was a shepherd of men. A shepherd uses their rod or staff to guide their sheep, not beat them. Actually changed my mind with this. Thank you for that reference. I appreciate it. That's good. Yeah, if you're a shepherd, and again, if you're a coach and you think physical discipline is the best way to motivate your athletes, you're not going to be in that position for very long, as you should not be. I remember this. Wasn't this around the same time when they also didn't raise the age of marriage with parental consent from age 12? Ooh, I would not be surprised if you are right. I don't know what the age of consent for marriage is in Oklahoma right now, but child marriage is very much a thing that is legal in lots of states around the country with consent if they're under 18, with parent permission if they're under 18. And it still shouldn't be. Like if you're like 14 or 16 and your parents say, it's okay, we're going to allow our child to get married to this dude who's 47, that is still legal in some states, and it's disturbing, and that should not be the case. But so I don't know the timeline there, but I wouldn't be surprised. They've taken away all tools for teachers. I mean, I know they love taking away books. I know they love taking away good history textbooks, but we can't let them take away their whipping rods. What are they going to hit the kids with? At this point, I don't even know what else they do in the classroom in Oklahoma besides hit the kids. Because it's not like we get news articles about what they're teaching children. Can parents opt out? Like, you are not allowed to hit my kids if the law says teachers can go ahead and hit kids. I think this was one of those things where there were, I don't know what current law in Oklahoma is, but one of the suggested laws in recent years said, like, parents have to opt in if they want to allow teachers to hit their kids, but I think it did not pass. I don't think it's addressed. So I'm not sure what the rules are, so I don't want to comment any further because I don't know the answer. The rod being a reference to the shepherd rod thing is false. The Hebrew word uses the same, used multiple times always for an instrument of beating. All right, there we go. So we can't say, so a rod is referenced in the Bible as a whipping rod and not the same as a shepherd rod, which is used to guide. Either way, not something we should follow. Friendly atheist drinking game. Take a shot every time Heaven mentions Oklahoma. If we did that, I would be wasted by now. All right, I'm going to move on to a different story. Give me a second here. I feel like I owe you a good news story. So let me give you a slightly good news story. That, of course, is still really horrible. You may have seen this in the news. Iowa recently signed into law a bill that revokes the civil rights of transgender people across the state. This is the headline from last week in Iowa. Kim Reynolds signs law ending trans civil rights protections. Iowa is the first state to repeal the rights. Basically, what they're doing is gender identity was a protected class under Iowa's anti-discrimination laws. They have crossed that off the list. So gender identity is no longer protected. And as that headline says, Iowa is now the first and only state to take civil rights protections away from a group that had been previously protected. So disgraceful, awful news. Also, it was an expected move because Iowa is currently run by Republicans. And whenever conservatives are in power, their goal is to hurt as many people as possible. That is true at the national level. That is true at the state level. Their only guiding principle is, who can we hurt? Which marginalized communities can we go after? How do we make their lives miserable? That's the Republican motto, right? So this bill isn't going to help anybody. It will make some people's lives worse. Despite what Kim Reynolds and some Republicans said, this will not protect women and children as if trans people were trying to hurt them. It doesn't do any of that stuff. Now, the reason I bring this up is because before Kim Reynolds got around to signing this bill, it was being debated in the legislature. And in the state Senate, Democrats did not have the votes to stop the bill, but they did have the ability to speak out about the bill. And one of the people who spoke out is a guy named Senator Tony Bisignano. And one of the things he pointed out, not just that this was a horrible bill, but he called out the Republican Party's hypocrisy given the things they say in public about their faith. He was especially furious at the bill's sponsor, Jason Schultz, for fast-tracking this bill, rejecting all the amendments offered by Democrats, and taking, he used the word pride, taking pride at this rollback of rights, and then never even bothering to defend it during debate. They just wanted to end the debate quickly so they could vote on it and get it in front of Kim Reynolds' hands. And by the way, Jason Schultz, the Republican who did this, also leads the weekly Bible study in the Iowa Capitol. So Republicans like him seem to know this was a bigoted bill. The whole point of it is just, let's hurt trans people. And so they passed it as quickly as they could. And their hope is that trans people are such an easy target that their members, by voting on this quickly and getting it over the line quickly, their members would never be punished for sacrificing that group for political gain. And you don't need to say that out loud when the symbolism speaks volumes, right? But this is what Tony Bisignano called him out on. And if you have not heard this speech, I urge you to listen to what this Democrat said about this Republican hypocrisy. It will make your heart grow 3 sizes.
Do you got anything legitimate to talk about why you're screwing people in housing and in employment? And in healthcare and everything else, can we talk about it over there? You hurt more people than I've ever seen in my political life, and you never speak about it. The only thing you can't wait to do is say the prayer in the morning. Follow what you say. What have they ever done to you? Most of you don't even know somebody who's transgender. You don't even know them, but you hate them. You have to hate them because you cannot do what you're doing today if you didn't. But we'll say a nice prayer to start the day. We always do. And then we proceed to violate people over and over and over again. All they want is their fair shake in life. They want to be like you. They want to live with you. Shame on you. Shame on all of you Christians who want to keep talking about your faith when this is what God talked about. I don't know where you go to church and I don't know what you read. But being a good Christian doesn't take much. Do unto others. Take care of your neighbor. Keep your hand out of other people's pockets. Not much, but you wouldn't know it in this chamber. You wouldn't know it. You'd think that this side of the chamber are the most raging Christians in the world. Shame on you, Christians.
Loved it. I mean, my God, if only other Democrats were as deeply heartfelt, passionate as that guy was about these issues, especially trans rights, where like even Gavin Newsom has shown himself to be an embarrassment. By the way, if you're curious, Tony Bisignano is Catholic, and he spoke with the LGBTQ publication, The Advocate, about this speech. And this is what he said. Bisignano shared that his passion for this issue is deeply personal. His niece, a trans girl, has been his guiding light. She's a sweet person. She's lovely. She's smart. She's talented. And you want to dispel and disgrace and demean these people? I'm sorry. Tony Bisignano, he speaks of himself in the third person, cannot sit in a room in any capacity to see that done to anybody for anything. And then he challenged his colleagues profess Christianity, noting that Schultz, the bill's sponsor, leads a weekly Bible study. I had to call that out because I'm a Catholic. We're Christians. And I asked him in a speech a few days ago, what Bible do you use at your Bible study? Because I've not seen quotes ever apply to what you're doing here. I mean, keep going. It's great. Love it. There was one other thing he said I wanted to share with you, which again is just nice because it's nice to see a Democrat fighting back without feeling ashamed of defending trans people. I'm tired of this. I'm calling them out. I'm calling them on it. Transgender people need champions and voices and not people voting against people because they're afraid. They need somebody willing to take it on the chin, and I'm willing to do that. Good for him, man. That is amazing. So that's Tony Bisignano. And his speech brought to mind the amazing speech that Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow did a couple years ago. She gave a viral speech. If you haven't seen it, you should Google it, where she called out fellow Christians for going after LGBTQ kids. And they called her a groomer for promoting LGBTQ kids. And she said at the time, this straight white Christian married suburban mom is going to protect kids from being marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian. It also brought to mind Congressman Maxwell Frost, the youngest guy in the Congress, who has repeatedly used his platform to speak out against Christian nationalism. And he has said in subcommittees, I oppose my faith being used to whitewash a racist, violent, and dangerous ideology. So like, yes, more of this. Why can't more Democrats speak out like this? More than anything, Bisignano shows the power that Democrats can have when they stand up for what's right, even when they are outnumbered. Like only one side here has the moral high ground, and they cannot be afraid of making that case, even if some moderate Democrats are all too willing to throw trans people under a bus because it seems politically convenient for them. But this is not new for this guy. Bisignano last year condemned another Republican for attacking President Biden for recognizing Trans Visibility Day. That colleague said Biden's declaration was incompatible with the teachings of Christianity, which it's not. And this is what Bisignano said when his colleague denounced that. Let me share this with you here. Yesterday, Senator Dickey brought hate into the Senate chamber. He criticized President Biden's acknowledgement of Transvisibility Day, implying it's incompatible with the teachings of Christianity, which we all know it's not. The hate, bigotry, and blatant racism that occurs in this chamber is disgusting, and I am done listening to it. Good for him. And there was one other thing I wanted to show you from this senator, which is that when I was going through his Facebook page, I came across this post, and honestly, I was not expecting to see it. I was kind of surprised, but check this out. This is from like just a couple weeks ago. Today, I met with Jason, a constituent of mine who represents the Iowa atheists and freethinkers. Jason brought some concerns around upcoming legislation to my attention, and we discussed the effects it will have across the state. Like, what? Good for him. That's awesome on all counts. And then I was like, wait, I know Jason. I reached out to Jason. I'm like, how was that? Did you know this guy? Was this cool? And this is what Jason told me. He said Senator Bisignano's speech was representative of how he's been a staunch supporter of equality and human rights for everyone. I thought it was very important that somebody stand up and speak out loud what their experience is like when they see these bills come through. I am proud to say he's the senator that represents my district. And even despite our disagreement on faith, he's willing to say and do things that protect all Iowans. So that is awesome. I'm so happy to see that. Again, this bill that he was fighting against did pass. Kim Reynolds signed it into law. Republicans run the state of Iowa. But if you're gonna lose, you might as well make a big freaking fuss about it, like Al Green did during Donald Trump's speech this week, and not just hold up paddles. And so I appreciate what Bisignano did. All right, what questions we got here? I don't know who this guy is, but I'm tearing up a little bit, right? I know. I have no emotions, and I was doing the exact same thing. And you wish more people like that would be in higher office too, so they could be heard by others. But I will tell you, I'm sure all of you know Congressman Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin came to my attention at first for making speeches like that in Maryland when he was part of the state legislature. And I remember thinking at the time, why is this dude in the state legislature? More people need to hear this guy. And eventually he ran for Congress and he won. And now he's one of the leaders of the Democratic Party and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. So it happens. It can happen. Don't be a dick. I don't know if you're talking to me or Republicans in general, but I agree. Between the war on DEI and higher ed and Iowa removing gender as a protected class, I could hypothetically get in trouble now for having they, them in my email signature at work. It's just stupid. I think in Texas, didn't they fire somebody for doing that? And then like the governor and lieutenant governor celebrated it or something? Just absolutely stupid. They're all for freedom of speech, but if you use the wrong pronoun in your email, you might just have to lose your entire livelihood. All right, I'm going to jump to another story here. This is, you might like this story. It's a continuation of one I did last year, actually. Okay. Give me a second here. All right, I did make a video about this maybe a year ago, but there's a big update that I want to share with you, and it involves a guy named Zach Radcliffe. And Zach Radcliffe is a 29-year-old graduate of Liberty University, very Christian school. That's the one that was run by Jerry Falwell, founded by Jerry Falwell, then run by Jerry Falwell Jr. before the Pool Boy scandal. Zach Radcliffe was also a worship director at Oakwood Church in Michigan. He was a guy who was so steeped in the Christian environment that he wrote a song for CPAC, the Conservative Crazy People Convention, and then he performed it on stage in 2019. And I want to show you this press release that Liberty University put out in 2019 when he did that. Look at this. There's Zach performing at CPAC. It was an opportunity I've dreamed about for a long time, said LU alumnus and songwriter Zach Radcliffe, who debuted his new single, during a portion of CPAC. To be able to stand up at my alma mater with the people that I love and the people who crafted my musicianship and songwriting, it's a surreal feeling. It's unbelievable. Only God could have brought this about. So Liberty, very proud of this dude. By the way, you will not find this press release on Liberty University's website anymore for reasons. We'll get to that. So that's Zach Radcliffe, big Trump supporter, very Christian, graduated from Liberty. And the last time I talked about this dude, it's because this was the story that was in the news. Oh, look, Zachary Joseph Radcliffe, 29, was arraigned on a charge of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 2 charges of aggravated child sexually abusive activity, 2 charges of child sexually abusive activity, and 6 charges of using the internet to communicate with another to commit a crime. Yikes. Faces life in prison. It was actually much worse if you read the details. This guy was accused of producing illicit content involving children, stretching all the way back to 2014. So he has been doing this stuff since he became a legal adult. So Liberty University then took down everything they had about him from their website. And the church that this dude worked at, they actually changed their entire website too, so that when you visited the church's homepage, it was just a giant, like, 1-page apology letter of sorts. And it basically said, we know, we are distancing ourselves from that guy. This is what the church posted at the time. We have received some very disturbing news about our music and youth director, Zachary Radcliffe, who is also the son of our senior pastor. I'm not going to read all of this, but the church is basically saying, look, we didn't know anything about this. We are cooperating with law enforcement. This is shocking. Look at this right here. I can't highlight anything, but we were told that Zachary had been soliciting inappropriate photos and possibly videos from teens. We have also heard other stories. That's vague. This information has ripped our hearts apart. The safety and protection of the individuals in our church is what is paramount to us. We are devoted to doing what we can for the care of the victims of these crimes. Blah, blah, blah. We have counseling being set up. If you know anyone impacted by this, let us know, etc., etc. That's what the church did. But yeah, this is all very, very disturbing. The church added that people should contact the police, which is good. Like, don't contact the church, contact the police, because you can't trust the staffers. Like, the kids would have been way safer just listening to drag queens at a library than listening to youth group pastors at this church. I'm going to skip ahead just to get to the point of why I'm bringing this up again. Only to say that this dude's father, who preached at this church and runs this church, has given a lot of sermons trashing trans people. And Zach Radcliffe has been right there for the ride, even chiming in at times like with an amen or a yeah whenever his dad trashes trans people. So that all happened like a year ago. It's been a while, but the pre-trial recently began. Like a couple weeks ago, they started doing the motions for the trial for this. Youth pastor positioned himself as big brother, uncle to boys he allegedly sexually abused. This is from February 24th, just a couple weeks ago. And again, that's the headline as the trial is getting underway, right? Like, people are making their testimonies heard. Survivors of the abuse are speaking to the judge as they prepare for what I believe is a jury trial. And they're just getting everything in order. But there is some stuff I wanted to share with you because it was really disturbing. Because when the pretrial was happening, the district judge who heard all this material, he actually did something about those charges. Look at this. And this is just from March 4th. This is from this week. District Court Judge J. Cedric Simpson read off the additional charges Tuesday, March 4th. Simpson added 9 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 21 counts of child sexually abusive activity to an already lengthy criminal complaint. He did not send 3 charges from the original 33 to trial, blah, blah, blah. Victims didn't appear for testimony. But here's what this means. We started with like 20-some charges. Now, this guy stands on trial on 17 charges of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 28 counts of child sexual abusive activity, 7 counts of aggravated child sexually abusive activity, and 7 counts of using a computer to commit a crime. That is, I think, 59. If you do the math there, 59 charges that this guy is now going to go to trial for. Not like 30, which is what he was up for earlier, but that many. It's so disturbing. And also disturbing is what happened in that courtroom this past week. The witnesses, ranging in age from 17 to 24, told the court Radcliffe solicited them for sexually explicit videos, sent them photos of himself naked, or paid them in exchange for videos. So that's the youth pastor doing that. And if you're wondering, wait a minute, where did he get the money to pay these kids for their videos? The answer is exactly what you think it is. One witness testified to Radcliffe using a church credit card to purchase items later given to a different victim. Sad to say, but I think that's what happened. That's what the judge said after hearing the testimony from the witness. So this dude's using tithe money to pay the children he was sexually abusing for content. Jesus. So I assume this now goes to a jury, and whether a jury believes everything that the judge just heard may be another story, but that's where this is heading. Instead of spending more time in church convincing Christians that trans people are their enemies or singing on a CPAC stage, Zach Radcliffe could spend the rest of his life behind bars. And honestly, even that feels too kind given the trauma he inflicted upon his victims. Let me share with you one more picture of this dude. That's from before he got arrested, because of course he is. Of course that's what he looks like. They all look like J.D. Vance clones at this point. I want to share one other thing with you, which I don't think I have a video of this, do I? Maybe I do. No, I'm lying. I don't have this video. But Frank Radcliffe, the father of this guy, he apparently delivered a sermon last Sunday. Didn't mention his son at all. But you know what he did talk about? He argued that higher birth rates of Muslim families would soon lead to every person in our government being Islamic. He also condemned, and I'm quoting here, dumb women, stupid women, and gay people, unquote, for protesting against Israel's genocide because, hey, gay people would not have equal rights in Palestine. Guess what? They don't have equal rights in the United States either, and yet they still have the moral courage to demand better. And the reason I say he apparently said that in a sermon is because the only place I saw that sermon was on TikTok, because the church has scrubbed its website of the sermon this dude just gave last week. Or maybe it was on Reddit where I saw it or something. But the church seems to have this habit of hiding things they don't want the public to know about. And yet the evidence keeps popping up. I don't know, maybe this is the most clear evidence that this church is not a safe space for anybody, all while the pastor is just creating new enemies for everyone in the congregation to hate. Meanwhile, the actual problem is the guy in his own family. All right, I'll stop there for that story. What other questions we got before I get to one last story? Yes, that is, I can't point. That is also how I feel about everything all the time, every day. I'm assuming there was so much overwhelming evidence that the church could not excuse it away and he actually had to actually face it. It certainly seems like that's the case because the church isn't denying this. They're not pretending to be victims. I think they have said it was just him and no one else knew anything about it and no one's covering up. Like, let's sacrifice that dude and the rest of us are safe. Let us continue as if nothing happened. That seems to be what they're doing. What church are we talking about? The church we are talking about, what was it called again? I had it up here a second ago. Oakwood? Yeah, it's Oakwood Church in Michigan. Still going. They still have social media and everything. It's a non-denominational Christian church. While that looks good politically, it's hard to prove. What are we talking about? This is, I assume you're talking about what the survivors and victims said in court. It's hard to prove and might not be advantageous in actually getting a conviction. We'll see how strong they make their case. I think that's why the judge was listening to the preliminary things and then saying, we need to add some charges to the docket, and it'll be up for prosecutors to then make their case. I think that's where they're going. But the fact that this guy could be found guilty of so many more charges is the truly troubling story there. Oh, thank you, Keith. I appreciate that. Beers for everybody. On me, somehow. All right, I got one last story for you here, and then we'll wrap it up. Let me pull up this thing. It's one more story about Oklahoma, because why not? Oklahoma Republicans are now pushing legislation that would allow Christian doctors to just refuse to help patients for any reason, as long as the justification is it violates my religious beliefs. That's it. And it would think about what that means. Doctors who use that excuse could refuse to do blood transfusions. They could refuse to provide STI testing, provide gender-affirming care, give vaccinations, prescribe birth control, propose mental health care. Anything that their religion tells them is wrong or forbidden, or you should just pray about it so you don't need my help, doctors could get out of doing those things if this bill were to pass. And we talked a lot about Catholic hospitals and their limitations. There are some procedures that Catholic hospitals will not do because they say it violates Catholic doctrine. And that's a problem because Catholic hospitals are taking over the country. Well, this bill would allow any medical professional to refuse any procedure that violates their ethical, moral, or religious beliefs and principles. This is what the bill actually says in this relevant part. And it says a new section of the law would read as follows. A medical practitioner has a right not to participate in a healthcare service that violates the medical practitioner's conscience. A healthcare institution may not be held liable for the exercise of conscience not to participate in a healthcare service by a medical practitioner employed, contracted, or granted admitting privileges by the institution. So the doctor doesn't have to do it. The hospital cannot be sued for it. Let's just have a free-for-all when it comes to healthcare. And so this is House Bill 1224. It's sponsored by a Republican named Kevin West. And earlier this week, that bill passed in the House Health and Human Services Oversight Committee on a 7-6 vote. And so that means it's going to be heard by the full House in Oklahoma. And by the way, the 7-6 vote is kind of weird because that means like 3 Democrats are on that committee. They all voted against it. But even 3 Republicans were like, this sounds bad. And they voted against it too. And the news outlet, the Oklahoma Voice, or just Oklahoma Voice, they posted about this bill, and this is what they said. The legislation, which West has said has been successful in a handful of states, could allow a physician or an entire hospital to choose not to offer procedures that conflict with personal beliefs. This excludes emergency care. So that's great. If it's an emergency, they still got to do it. Although the bill does not define the parameters that create that situation. So it says you don't have to do, you have to do the procedure if it's an emergency. Oh, what counts as an emergency? We don't know. No specific procedures or types of care are outlined in the bill, meaning a healthcare provider, institution, or payer could choose to stop offering STD testing, blood transfusions, or elective procedures. They don't have to do anything if they say it goes against their religion. So that's disturbing. There is the Democratic House Minority Leader, Cindy Munson, who spoke out against this bill. Because again, they don't have the votes to stop it, but they exist. They can throw gum in the works. They can speak out against it. And this is what the House Democratic Minority Leader said in Oklahoma. We just had a conversation last week about the lack of maternal or the amount of maternal health care deserts in the state. And we know that most of what we're talking about here is abortion, gender-affirming care, those types of procedures and services. And so where will Oklahomans go? Even if it's just a handful of people who need care, if there's truly no access, if people decide to take this law and say, I'm not going to provide a procedure or service because it goes against my conscience, where will Oklahomans go? And that's a fair point, because if you're a woman and you need certain types of health care And the only people in your rural community in Oklahoma are doctors who say, well, you shouldn't have had sex, so I'm not going to test you for anything involving that, pregnancy, STIs, whatever, because it goes against my religion. What do you want her to do? If the Hippocratic Oath says do no harm, and the Republican Party says do as much harm as possible as long as we're hurting the people we hate, Republicans are saying we come first, not your ethical priorities. The guy who's sponsoring this, Kevin West, he said this bill was successful in other states. He didn't offer any evidence to back that up, which is worth pointing out. But I think a bigger part of this is the vagueness, because we know there are conservative doctors and right-wing hospitals that would rather place women at risk of death than providing safe abortions, even if they're not Catholic hospitals. And this bill would create conditions that allow right-wing doctors to limit their services based on personal delusions rather than doing what's in the best interest of patients. And this bill says they would not get in trouble for it. They cannot be held liable for damages. So if a patient dies because a doctor said, I don't want to help you because Jesus, that physician will not suffer any professional consequences for it. And that could be a problem in Oklahoma, which is largely rural, where they don't have a choice of doctors. If one doctor says, I refuse to help you because I'm a Christian, you cannot just drive 2 minutes to the next hospital and get help there. This is the problem with abortion restrictions too. A lot of women may not be able to get an abortion in a certain part of a state or a certain state, so they have to cross state lines. But now we're talking a lot of money and time. They got to drive several hours to get to another state. They got to spend money on a hotel room and gas, and they have to take time off of work. And that is time and money they may not have because the doctors in their state or the politicians in their state are so selfish and so religious that they refuse to do the right thing, right? So keep in mind, who's clamoring for this bill? Are doctors asking Republicans to pass this bill? No. West said he did not speak to healthcare providers before he filed this bill. Just like Republicans who push for Bibles in schools, they never talk to teachers beforehand. Like, why bother talking to people when you know the people who are going to be affected by your legislation don't want it? Right? Nothing Republicans love more than forcing other people to adopting their beliefs because they are unable to persuade anyone to adopt those beliefs. I guess the only consolation right now is that bills like this have been proposed before in Oklahoma, and they have been rejected in Oklahoma. Even now, this bill that we are talking about, the state, they tried this a year ago, and the state Senate rejected it. And when this bill was in front of the state Senate subcommittee earlier this week, the subcommittee rejected it. But because it passed in a House subcommittee, the full House will get to debate it and vote on it. And if they pass it, it's going to go to the Senate anyway. So there will be votes on this. So, I mean, I guess, yay, that some Oklahoma Republicans decided this is a bad idea, but they're not speaking for the full Senate, the full legislature. So we will see what happens with this. Kevin West, by the way, has a history of extremism. If you Google him, a few years ago, he actually agreed with a fellow extremist lawmaker that Black Lives Matter activists are just like members of the KKK. That's what one of his colleagues said. And then Kevin West is like, yep, I agree. Something like that. So that's who we're talking about. This guy who's the champion of Jesus. All right, I'll stop there. What questions we got here? Wouldn't that violate their medical oath? Yup, but it's not the Bible, so they don't care. That's how it works. I stepped away for a second, so sorry if I'm repeating something, but could patients converge on a few progressive providers known by informal networks? I mean, in theory, yes, but having a list of the providers who will help you is a dangerous practice because it's putting the people on that list in danger. If the state passes a law that puts these people in danger too, if the state says abortion is banned and there's a secret list of doctors who will help you anyway, those doctors could go to jail. Now, it wouldn't affect this particular bill, which says doctors are allowed to say no, but they don't have to say no if they don't want to, whatever. But what you're suggesting is what has happened. in a lot of places. So yeah, that is what would happen. But also, again, keep in mind, it's Oklahoma. You have to drive a long way if you live in a rural area to get to a place where there might be those doctors who are willing to help you. And that's the rough part. They could refuse care to a black person or a gay person. They could refuse to provide services to a Democrat or an immigrant. I mean, yeah, based on the reasoning they use, there are churches that still oppose interracial marriage. And they will say, because there's always a local news story every time it happens, they will say, well, God doesn't want the races to mix. And they'll be like, Noah's son Ham has a curse or whatever. Those people do exist. And you can imagine that if some doctor says it's against my religion to touch another woman, if I'm a male doctor, or I don't believe, I believe you're a Democrat, I believe you're satanic, and so I don't want to help you with anything. Like, they can make up whatever excuses they want and not face any punishment for it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the fact that Republicans want to create a situation where that could happen should be disturbing to everyone. How fast that rule would be repealed if doctors started to deny service to Republicans. Maybe that's the way to do it. Maybe you get good doctors to say, all right, if you're passing this bill, my conscience says I'm not going to help people who make others suffer. The problem with that is the progressive doctors who could do such a thing are all generally nice people who would never do such a thing. That's why they're nice progressive Democrats. So nice in theory, but it's not going to happen. Okay, request. We need to make a drinking rule for every time Hammond brings up Oklahoma. Speak for several of us here. You're not the only one, and we're all going to be drunk. Oh, thank you for that donation, Sean. I appreciate it. Anything else here, Den? Otherwise, I think we're jumping to the last call with some quick takes on other issues. Oh, once again, beers for all. Some quick takes on stuff. What do we have for that, Den? Oh, we'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to stall while Den figures this out. I hope you're all doing okay this week. I don't know if you saw the Trump speech. I sat through it because I hate myself. It was disturbing and awful. And I think I'm more disturbed by the Democrats' pathetic way of trying to respond to it. Let me do this, Den. There we go. Let's try this. Aha. All right, Den, this is all you. I'm going to let you take it from here. What do we have first on this list of other things I have probably tweeted about and forgotten about? Franklin Graham. Oh, this is good. Let me move myself from here. Franklin Graham, the evangelist, tweeted, yesterday's meeting between Trump and Zelensky was tense and unfortunately did not end well. Yeah, no kidding. The progress we had all hoped for is again delayed. Pray for the people of Ukraine and that there would be an end to this terrible war. And part of me is like, that's good. Franklin Graham acknowledges that we want to end the war and we want to help the people of Ukraine. Meanwhile, everything else Franklin Graham ever says is how much he loves Donald Trump and supports him and pushes for MAGA propaganda. It's like, dude, it's your boy. Go call him up and tell him to stop siding with Putin. I don't know why he can't figure out where the problem is coming from. Why do you think that meeting did not end well? It's not because Zelensky did anything. It's because Trump tried to be an asshole to him. What else we got? I'll start at the bottom here. Republicans looking to fully kill public schools. The majority Republicans approved a plan that would raise the salary cap to participate in the EFA program from 350% of the poverty level to 400% and to eliminate the cap. I'm trying to figure out what this one was in response to, but basically they are trying to make it impossible for schools to get federal funding for stuff that they need federal funding for. And why are they trying to take money away from public schools? They're doing it so they could send it to private religious schools. And so this response up here, no tax dollars should go toward religious-based private schools. End of story. There's a Christian school in my town that forced a teenage student to apologize to the congregation for getting pregnant after being raped by a deacon. And I kind of want more details about what the hell happened there. But again, the reason Trump wants to shut down the Department of Education, the reason they want to take money away from colleges, universities, and public schools across the country are so they can take that money and give it to private religious schools. The Supreme Court's going to give them a path to do it. They have given them a path to do it. But that's the game they are playing right now. They're trying to defund public schools in order to support private religious indoctrination centers. Percent of school vouchers that go to religious institutions. Florida, 82% of the money that they have for school vouchers go to religious schools. Arizona, 87%. North Carolina, 92%. You can see Wisconsin, Indiana, 96, 98%. Every time schools say we want school choice, we want parents to be able to decide where to send their kids, what that means in practice is public schools get worse because they don't have money, and private religious schools get more funding for indoctrination. And who's left? Who suffers because of that? Communities suffer because they don't have public schools. Students who have disabilities and needs, and they need special help, social workers and what have you, they get screwed over because the private schools don't necessarily have to take them and don't have the resources to help them. Students who need extra help, students who are gifted, may not get the help they need at private religious schools. Like, it's just a giant exchange from good institutions that could use the support to iffy ones that openly say our goal is to indoctrinate kids in religion and academics is second. And yes, as Joe was pointing out in the comments here, a lot of that money that is being spent on vouchers, for vouchers to go to private religious schools, a lot of that money comes from parents who are already sending their kids to those private religious schools. They had the money to do it. They don't need more. So again, we are hurting people who can't, like, you're only making the rich get richer. They could always afford this. It's the people who have no money, who wanted to send their kids to a public school, who are now being pressured to send their kids to a private religious school. Ben Wickler, who's the Democratic chair in Wisconsin, in our internal polling, among Democrats likely to vote in the spring Supreme Court election, only 1% approve of Elon Musk. How many disapprove? 94%. I've never seen anyone so loathed. And that's an interesting comment. So in April, Wisconsin has a 4-3 liberal edge on the Supreme Court. But one of those, I believe the Democrats is stepping down. So in order for Wisconsin Supreme Court to still have a Democratic majority, they need to get a Democrat elected. Elon Musk is putting money into that race to help the Republican get elected so they can bring back gerrymandering and all that stuff. And that's what Ben Wickler and Democrats are up against. But one thing he's pointing out here is that among Democrats who say they're going to vote next month in the special election, they hate Elon Musk, which is a signal that if you're a Democrat anywhere, start using Elon Musk as treating him as the enemy. Nobody likes this guy. He's so bad at everything he does. He gets labeled as a genius, but in practice, he screws up everything. I think another rocket of his blew up last night and screwed over the airfield in Florida. So if you're a Democrat trying to score easy points, go criticize Elon Musk. It's easy right now, and people are clamoring for it. This is from Aaron Rupar. This is amazing. This is Alina Habba, who's one of Donald Trump's lawyers, who said in an interview that veterans who have been fired from government jobs, she defended it because she said perhaps they're not fit to have a job at this moment. Yeah, the veterans are too weak. Why do they need jobs? They work for the VA. They work for other places. Let's go ahead and play the video, Dan, if that works.
President starting to think about maybe some of those veterans who worked for the federal government and maybe what the administration can do to at least help salvage their lives?
Well, as you know, we care about veterans tremendously. I mean, that's something the president has always cared about. Anybody in blue, anybody that serves this country. But at the same time, we have taxpayer dollars. We have a fiscal responsibility to use taxpayer dollars to pay people that actually work. That doesn't mean that we forget our veterans by any means. We are going to care for them in the right way, but perhaps they're not fit to have a job at this moment or not willing to come to work. And we can't, I wouldn't take money from you and pay somebody and say, sorry, they're not going to come to work. It's just not acceptable.
Yeah, how many veterans are just like skipping out on their jobs? Again, if they were firing people who weren't doing their jobs, we'd be having a very different discussion in this country. But right now, Elon Musk, with the full support of the Republican Party, is just firing people who work for national parks and figuring out the weather, and scientists and anyone who works in any federal government agency whatsoever, not because they're bad at their jobs, but because they exist. They're just getting rid of them in order to destroy those agencies, because Elon Musk is like those Republican lawmakers that want to siphon money from public education and send it to private Christian schools. Elon Musk wants to destroy the federal government so that people are more reliant on private businesses like the ones he owns. And again, Republicans don't seem to care, and Elon Musk should be held against every single one of them because they're all supporting the stuff he's doing. Already, I think this week we saw the Republican leadership say, stop having town halls, stop talking to your constituents. They're mad at you right now. The last thing you want to do is allow your voters to ask you questions on camera. Meanwhile, Trump just sends out his dumbest staffers and they say the dumb things right in front of everybody.
Starting to think.
What else we got here? Oh, this is interesting. This is from Ryan Burge. He's a sociologist, does a lot of data analysis, and apparently he's coming out with a book soon called The American Religious Landscape. And so I haven't seen an advanced copy of this book yet, but it's from Ryan Burge. He's very good at what he does. If you want to understand with data what is happening with religion in America, Ryan is really good at producing charts that are easy to understand and then analyzing it in a way that makes sense, even if you're not a math person at all. He happens to be religious, by the way, but so many people, left-wing, right-wing, religious, secular, rely on him because the analysis he provides is really useful. So it's worth checking out that book, pre-ordering it if you haven't done so yet. Anything else here? What is this one? This is from Professor Carolyn Molla-Corbin. Court drops Arizona's 15-week limit on abortions. Arizona had a cap on when you could get an abortion. They got rid of that. And that's not a surprise. It follows the decision of Arizona voters last November because they enshrined a fundamental right to terminate a pregnancy into the Arizona Constitution. And now a judge says, okay, well, then a 15-week limit is no good. I mean, the people do not want what Republicans are giving them. They voted for that to enshrine that in the Constitution last November. And now a judge is like, all right, well, I guess abortion is legal in this state, so that law is illegal. So that's fantastic news. It's like a rare bit of good news, but Arizona is one of those states where they could very easily go Republican, but they've stayed Democrat so far. I hope it stays that way, but it's a rough climb, man. So some get a bit of good news from Arizona. Missouri is funneling taxpayer dollars into anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers that mislead and shame people seeking care. This is interesting. This is a ProPublica article that basically says if you are donating to those anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers, you can get a tax break. And I think they're allowing, I forgot the specifics, but I think it was like if you donate up to $50,000, you can write that off on your taxes. And the thing is, if you're going to pay that much in taxes anyway, you might as well make a donation of that amount so you could write it off or something. Like, it's all a way of funneling money to these anti-abortion fake pregnancy clinics that don't help women. And that's what this bill would do. It would reward people for donating to those nonprofits and nowhere else. You can't do that with other groups. I mean, I skimmed the article. I will admit, I did not read the full article. I didn't have time to this week, but if you read the first couple paragraphs of it, it kind of gives away what's the what's going on there. Oh, and this is just cool. I love crosswords. I love doing them. I write crosswords occasionally for the New York Times and regularly for Slate. But these are some people who are longtime creators of crossword puzzles, and they have put together several books. These are original puzzles, easy to do, some challenging, but the whole goal is to raise money to support abortion centers and to provide access to abortion care for people who need it. You could see from this fundraising update, they raised like $7,500 for this particular book. This is volume 5 of These Puzzles Fund Abortion. And you could see the website right over there at the bottom. Check it out if you like puzzles. Thank you, Den. He's putting the link right there. Check out that link. I have nothing to do with this particular book, but I know a lot of the people who are participating in it. Really good cause and just awesome to see. All right, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Den, for helping out with everything, and thank all of you for watching. Remember, you could support this channel by going to patreon.com/Hemant, and you can always go to friendlyatheist.com to sign up for my newsletter and all that. Next week, I will not be here Friday. I will do this show on Thursday night, so I will hope to see you then, and have a wonderful week.